Hey everyone, and welcome to the Irenic Ref podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gross. The word Irenic means aimed at or aiming towards peace. And my goal with this podcast is to try to create a bridge between coaches and officials by showing the humanity of each other in a more robust way, which isn't necessarily achievable in the minimal interactions a coach and official may experience during a game. With all that said, let's get to it. Today's guest is going into his 19th year of officiating. He has officiated multiple region contests, SD16 games, and has been selected to officiate the state tournament 5 times. He is a very modest guy and wouldn't mention this himself, and he maybe wouldn't want me to, but I am going to anyways. He was a great athlete at Hot Springs High School. He was selected as the 2001 and 2002 11A All-State First Team Special Teams player. 3 times, apparently. 3 times. He currently holds the single-season rushing record of 1,900 yards, as well as 5 other football and 2 track and field records as of 2022, so we'll have to hear from him about that, at Hot Springs, and was inducted into the Hot Springs High School Hall of Fame for the class of 2022. A fun fact about Joe is that, you got a little hint at who this is. About him is that he is left-handed, and I recently found out that he really fancies the word astronomical. And so, with all that said, please help me welcome Joe Beehler. Joe, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of want to talk about, I kind of got some hints about this word astronomical that is an inside joke. I heard something about that and was told maybe I should bring that up. And it was also brought up at the 2022 Hall of Fame inductee ceremony that you're a part of. So maybe give us a little insight into that word, and then also just tell us about the experience of being inducted into the Hot Springs Hall of Fame.
I'm guessing from that intro part, it was probably Genevieve that gave you that little tidbit. But the astronomical word comes from after we beat Canton in the semifinal game. I was interviewed on the news, and the news, I think it was Jamie Zepp, who's no longer with us anymore, but asked me how big of a win this was. The first time Hot Springs had ever made it to the Dome, and was just, how big of a win is it? And I said, well, it's astronomical. And apparently most of the people on my football team didn't know that was a real word. They thought I made it up, and after a while, they figured out that it was a real word, but they still gave me a hard time. And I was actually even back. We had our 20-year class reunion this last weekend over the 4th of July, and on our float, somebody wrote, "We're astronomical," because it's been kind of a running joke with most of my classmates for a lot of years.
Nice. That is awesome. I had no idea. I actually did. Where I got it from is I was looking, just looking some things up, because I know a lot of people that fill out the form for me to give an introduction. They are pretty humble people, and they're not going to really showboat and overtalk themselves too much. And so I actually just typed your name into Google, and then I saw the 2022 inductee ceremony, and I just listened to your dad, Scott, talk about, all the accolades you had, and that came up. He almost didn't say anything about it because I think he mentioned you were going to mention that, but that's where it came from. So kudos to Hot Springs, and even just the fact that we can do live streams and see those things.
Yeah, I'm glad that that's still out there.
Yeah, yep. And like I said, I just typed Joe Beehler and got some tidbits and some information there, but. Anyway, again, and then tell us about that 2022 induction into the Hall of Fame. Like I mentioned, you were a very good football athlete, very good track athlete. Your dad mentioned basketball maybe wasn't the best just because he married someone who's 5 foot, so the height factor wasn't there, but the skill was still there and the speed was still there. You did soccer, you did baseball, different things like that. But to be inducted into a Hall of Fame is no small thing. So tell us about that experience and, what it means to you, and then, the Hot Springs community for yourself.
It's always a really humbling honor. I mean, when you it's been 20 years, like I said a little bit ago, that all that happened, and that people still remember you, and you can walk in and people remember, oh, hey, you were the fast guy, or you were the football guy. That you kind of leave a mark on the older people of the community, but also the younger people that were younger than me that still see me and say hi and things like that. That it's always kind of very humbling to know that you made a mark on that many people, that they still remember you. I think I had 18 or 19 letters and had offers in 4 different sports to play college sports, and chose football and baseball. And went to school in Minnesota for a couple of years, Southwest State, and played a couple of years of baseball and football, and tore up my thrown shoulder, and ended up playing 3 more years of football at Black Hill State, which actually, as long as we're on the topic, our 2006 Black Hill State football team just getting inducted into the Black Hill State Hall of Fame too.
Wow.
So pretty cool honor again.
Yeah, that is super cool and super fun. I guess we'll get into that a little bit more of how you got into officiating. So I'm gonna hold that back. I'll ask that question later. But yeah, just let's go right now into just a personal introduction. I kind of gave away a few things there, but tell us who you are, where you're from, family, what you do, anything else you want to include there of hobbies if you have any outside of officiating.
Grew up when I was real young, lived in Edgemont. We made the jump to Hot Springs for better sporting opportunities when I was in middle school. My parents were there for about 9 years. Then now they've moved over to Wyoming, where it only took them 20 years of teaching to figure out that you get paid more, heck of a lot more in Wyoming as a teacher and a coach. But spent a few years playing sports in college, married, no kids. I got a couple of siblings that were both pretty good in sports as well. My brother coaches, or used to coach. Both my parents, like I said, teachers and coaches. My sister coaches at Spearfish High School. She's a volleyball coach and track coach there. My brother did coach basketball at Spearfish, but he's moved into a different career, so he's no longer, he doesn't have the free time to be able to coach anymore. Pretty tight-knit family. We have always gone to each other's stuff. I think that's important. Spent 10 years living in Spearfish, moved to Rapid for a few years, and we moved to Phoenix, where I took 3 years off of reffing actually, and then came back a few years ago. So I've been reffing since 2006, so 18 years, but there was 2.5 seasons that I didn't ref. So just during COVID, there wasn't anywhere to get picked up while we were in Phoenix. So I was happy when my wife wanted to move back to South Dakota that I could have that easy in to get back into reffing. It's one of the things that now that the competitive sports is in the rear view, it's the one way that you can kind of still be involved. You get paid to run around and watch basketball, so it's one of the best seats in the house. And it's just, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is I just interviewed D'Amico recently, and he almost verbatim said the same thing. You get to run around, get paid, and you got the best seats in the house. Like that was basically almost verbatim. And I don't know, you guys hang out a lot. I know that you officiate a bunch of games together. But yeah, I think that's funny but it's true. I mean, we as officials get the opportunity to, really enjoy what we do. We get exercise, we get paid for it. And again, you're right on the court. And so, that's a great point to make. But speaking of D'Amico, I don't know if this is someone that influenced you, but I'll start with people who influenced you to start getting into officiating. Obviously, being a sports person, sports is in your blood, sports is in your family with coaching. But what made you go into? So maybe I'll start this way. How'd you get started? Like, what made you get into officiating versus the coaching realm?
It was the first year my parents had moved over to Newcastle, Wyoming, and I was still playing football in college. And I was back at their house on for Christmas break, and I went in and practiced with my dad's basketball team, just keeping in shape and go push around their kids. And it was a Saturday morning, and the AD comes in and he's like, "Hey, we've got games tonight, and we've got a bunch of officials that are out sick. Have you ever refed any basketball, or would you want to?" And I said, I've refed my brother's 4th and 5th grade stuff a few years ago, but that's about the extent of my experience. And he's like, well, we'll pay you $45 a game to do it. And I said, you'll do what? And so I was like, sure, I'll make $90 tonight to do that. And so I ref that game. And when that was over, the AD asked me, he goes, we've got a few more over Christmas break and a few more after Christmas break. And if you want to do any of those, you sure can. And so I worked some middle school and some sub varsity. And then my first couple of years, I worked a lot of sub varsity there because my brother and sister both played varsity. So I'd drive down from Spearfish about an hour, and I'd usually go Friday night and work the Friday games, 2 games and 2 Saturday games, and drive back. And he'd pay me one way of mileage on Friday and the other way on Saturday, and I'd get paid to watch basketball and ref basketball, and then I would stay and watch my siblings play. So it was very beneficial for me and for them. And then when I was done, as I was getting done playing college football, my college football coach was leaving football, and he used to ref before, and he knew that I refed because I'd left some liftings and some practices earlier, just off-season stuff early to go ref. And he said, I'm going to get back into it. Do you want to do it? I'll bring you along if you want to do a few varsity games with me. I said, sure. And so he got me into some of those, and then got me into the junior college stuff probably way earlier than I should have been doing it, and kind of drugged me along. And so that my football coach from college was John Scott, and he's still reffing in Wyoming. And then after him, I spent a lot of time in the car. If you may or may not have interviewed Dave Rogers and Nick Gottlieb, but those 2 guys, I spent a lot of time in the car. And Dave really didn't say much on the court, but on the way home, he had a very good way of, if I were you, I would.
Yeah. And
then just talk me through this, talk me through that. And I think I learned more on the car rides to and from than anywhere else, because once you get on the floor, you're not on an island, but you are a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So those would kind of be my main, I think, influences and drivers would be those guys that I spent a lot, and Mark Noggle too. I spent a lot of time in the car with Mark Noggle. He's moved on from the officiating world, but he's still a superintendent at the schools in Hill City. So in Custer. So we see him around too.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know too many West River guys. I mean, when I was out there 2 years ago for this tournament, I met a bunch of guys that I had no idea who they were. They're getting inducted into the BH SOA or SOA,
Mm-hmm.
Their Hall of Fame out there. And so I was like learning names, seeing faces. I had heard some names. I've heard the name Tin Man thrown around quite a bit. And so, those different things. Yeah. And so, and so I put some names with faces, but yeah, I mean, Dave Rogers, I'll put him down. That's a person that would be a good one to get on there.
He retired last year after 30 years, and I think he worked 18 or so state tournaments, and
yeah,
he's very, very knowledgeable. Now he's helping out here, mentor and evaluate and things like that. So he didn't completely leave the game. He just knew that getting up and down the floor wasn't happening as well as he wanted to anymore.
For sure. No, that makes sense. At some point, that's going to happen to all of us, and it's probably going to be a sad day. But yeah, if we can stick with the game, that's going to be good.
Hey everyone, just a quick break right here. If you like what you have been listening to, and you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like and hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on any of the podcasting hosts, go ahead and click the download button and the like as well, and leave a rating for me. Thank you, and back to the interview.
It seems like it doesn't seem like you were one of those people that kind of was pushed into this with, by really a coach. It was kind of like happenstance of, hey, we're running out of people, or people are getting sick, and we need someone to jump in and officiate. And I think initially, correct me if I'm wrong here. So initially, you're like, oh wow, the money that's pretty good, especially if I'm a college student. Some stuff I can make. I can go home. I can watch my sister, my brother, my dad coach, and then I can drive back to school and still be able to do workouts. But then I would assume at some point it shifted to like, man, I really enjoy this. I'm starting to like really understand the rules. I'm starting to grow in friendship with these people. It's not just about, getting the money and going home. When do you think that shift sort of happened for you?
Probably around year 4 or 5. 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there, when you kind of move from the sub-varsity schedule where you kind of drive yourself to, whether it's the either local and spearfish, or I go to some of the Newcastle over in Wyoming, or Newell or Belfouche, some of those, but you're driving yourself there. Yep. To when you go to the varsity games, you start driving with people and you start meeting and developing those relationships. And I kind of, it was one of those things like, oh, it's fun, it's good to do. And then I kind of backed into it to start with, just happened to be the right place at the right time. And then my college football coach just happened to be right place, right time. And then as I'd done enough games, our assigner at the time called me and goes, hey, I need you to go do a district game. And I said, well, I'm not certified, so I can't. And he used a couple expletives on me and says, you're what? How are you not certified? You should have been there a couple of years ago. So, well, nope, never even thought about it. He goes, well, you're going to take the test next year. So, okay. So I took the test, and then a couple of years later, when I was eligible, I made my first state tournament. And just kind of happened to be right place, right time, around the right people to move me along, and being both my parents' basketball coaches and kind of a point guard. When I played, I see the game pretty well, and just have a feel that maybe I was a little bit lucky that I was able to back into it until the point I wanted to put, or was able to put the time into really knowing the rules and knowing enough that you don't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
And to be one of the people that people come ask those questions then.
Yep.
Say, hey, when they got a weird play, they call you instead of, and I guess I still call people when I have a weird play, but you get a lot more of those phone calls as you learn the rules and become better at the craft.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting, that transition, because I wouldn't say I'm quite there yet. I'm definitely still the people that are texting the Joe Beehlers of the world and asking them the questions. But it's something to look forward to. And the longer you stay in, the more questions you get, and the more stories that you get to experience. Like you're talking about driving with Dave and how he's giving you those subtle critiques and doing it in a nice way, and the candor that's necessary to keep people moving through the game. And so, speaking of stories like that, is there any stories, some fun stories that you have off the top of your head, or that you've thought about that were really good ones and memorable stories that you've had around the game of basketball and officiating?
I usually go do an early bird tournament in Gillette every year, and that's always a really fun one. They usually bring 20 or 30 and 20 officials or so, and there's Colorado, South Dakota team, North Dakota teams, Montana teams, and both Colorado and Wyoming. And one year, I think we had there was 8 girls teams there, and 4 of them were state champions the year before. So it's nice working or living kind of right on the border and going that direction, and you get to meet a whole new group of people. There's a Wyoming group that I work with and a South Dakota group that you kind of work with, and that's a fun tournament. You go and stay for 3 days. It's kind of like a state tournament atmosphere where there's usually some good camaraderie and beverages in the hotel in the evenings and things like that. Those are good. And there's a lot of car rides where you get home and you've laughed so hard that your face is tired.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I mentioned this in another interview, but the West River people kind of get that, I think, somewhat of a deeper camaraderie with the fact that there are some travels that are involved on the west side of the state there. Maybe as you start working your way up, you don't, but when you're first getting into it, you're driving to Newell, like you said. You're driving to, maybe you even drive to Pierre one time for a game, or I'm trying to think, Phillip, just different lengths like that.
I usually go to Pierre a couple times a year. Usually that's about, I think we're going to Winter once next year. And so we'll go 3 hours east and 3 hours west and a couple hours south for college games in Chadron or Panhandle, Nebraska.
Yeah.
We'll go 3-4 hours in about every direction, because we have a bunch of schools in the hills that are I think in 10 gyms in about 20 minutes, but there's also another 20 gyms that are 2 hours and 3 hours away that you guys tend to be able to stay a little closer to home.
Yep.
There's a lot more there's a lot more stops along the way.
Yeah, and so I think there's just that deeper camaraderie, like you said. Like, you're probably getting story on top of story in that car, and like you said, you get home, your face hurts because you've been driving for 2.5 hours, and maybe an hour and a half of that is laughing. I mean, you probably start with some things that happen in the game, some other things like rules that maybe you want to get better at, but by the end of the day, you're like, man, I just want to fellowship with these people, and so it's really a different dynamic, and I wish we had that more on this side of the state. So I'm jealous of the Black Hills and the West River guys that get to experience that side of the game a little bit more. But go ahead.
I was going to say, there was 1 week last year, I think I went to Bennett County one day, and that's a 2.5+ hour trip. Went to Crazy Horse, and I went to Lakota Tech in the same week, and those are all, I think, you're spending no less than 2 hours each direction. So, and a couple of those were with the same group of people. So you're like, all right, well, I just spent 6 hours last night in the car with you, and 4 more hours today in the car. And so I think you do spend a whole lot more time when you start working on the reservations, or what we call the prairie circuit, when you go out to Phillip and Faith and Timber Lake, and you get up into the western central part of the state, out in the plains there. There's some ground in between schools, and there's just not very many officials out there, and they get tired of bringing the same 4 or 5 guys out, and so they'll run us out from the hills every so often, or they'll bring some guys from Pierre, just have a change of face so that you don't see the same coaches and the same players night after night. That gets difficult too.
Yeah, and I would assume that also it's better just because there's a different style of officiating too. I mean, East and West, there's a little bit different style. I'm not saying there's like a huge, because we're all calling the rules, we're calling the plays the same way. Fouls are fouls, violations are violations. But yeah, I think it's also just nice to see fresh faces, like you said. And you might see that same person at a state tournament that you're going to. So I think a lot of I talked to Brett Gardner at Winter, and he's the coach and the AD, and he's like, I just like seeing different faces because we might be able to see this person at a state tournament, and we can know how they're going to officiate. And so, I think that maybe plays into it as well with ADs and who they're hiring. But yeah, let's keep going. In a memorable interaction with we can start with a memorable interaction with an official, and then let's also do a memorable interaction with a coach. And so, if you can think of one of each of those, that'd be great. Tell us a story about that.
On the floor or off the floor?
Doesn't matter. Yeah, completely up to you.
I guess for coaches, for the first several years I ref, since my dad coached in the area and I grew up in the area, many of the coaches that were coaching, I played against, essentially. They were still coaching, and when I first started officiating, and that was a weird transition to make, because they all knew me by name. And I had more anonymity in the junior varsity ranks than I did on the varsity floor, because you walk into Custer, where 30 miles away we combined for baseball, half the people sitting in the stands, and now they're all yelling at you, and you're going, wait a second, if I'm working the sub-varsity game, nobody cares. But my first varsity game was Custer St. Thomas More, in a rivalry game that I probably was in no way, shape, or form ready to go. But we made it through, and it was fun. But specific coach, man, I'm trying to think. There's been a couple of one-liners that maybe aren't all that appropriate.
Sure.
That make you laugh really, really hard. Might have an expletive or two in them that gets whispered in your ear, not necessarily at you, but just a commentary of the game. And there's been a few of those that have been really, really funny. Yeah. Had a pretty good interaction a couple of years ago at the state basketball tournament with Jamie Parrish. He was actually, his first coaching job was me in 7th grade, my 7th grade football team. And I had to give him a hard time there, and about just how much he's really grown as a coach. He spent a lot of time with my parents in his first couple of years, and then went back east, and we've kept in pretty good touch. And I always like seeing him when we get out that direction. And then just there's usually a couple games a year. And we've done it a few times. We got in trouble. I'll probably get in trouble for saying it, but we do the no-lanyard challenge.
Okay.
And if you drop your whistle, you have to buy the first round.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's funny. I gotta ask because I had Royce on here, and I think he talked about officiating a Custer St. Thomas game. Is that the same one that you were on that you were talking about there, or no?
No, they play
Okay.
twice a year. They're two of the Custer is one of the perennial when Larry Luchins was there.
Yep.
The all-time wins leader. He actually broke that record against my team when I was in high school.
Yeah.
We played them 5 times that year, and 3 of them were pretty close. One was they beat us by a little more, and then the night that they broke their wins record, I think they shot like 76% from the floor, and they didn't miss, and they beat us by 30, and it was over when it started.
Wow.
They were on a mission that night, and so with about a minute and a half left, my dad called timeout and read a thing for Larry and gave him a plaque and a ball and said, "Thanks for the butt whipping."
Yeah. I think if I remember right, your dad did actually mention that in the Hall of Fame banquet as well. But yeah, so and I get what you're saying with a lot of people might hear like when you're saying, oh, a coach will say an expletive to you, and you're like, oh, well, that's supposed to be a technical. There's a lot of things that go said, and they're not directed at a official. They're not said very loud. It's whispered. It's muttered, and as officials, we're trying to make the experience the best we can for the players. And so the point of I just want to explain this because the point is, yeah, the coach is going to be mad at his team and at himself. And so he might say something under his breath. And I will use the cleanest way that someone can say it is, man, if only we could make a layup tonight. Like that's the cleanest way they could say it. But they could say it a different way. And it gets this same point across. And it kind of lightens the mood a little bit because they also can get something off their chest that they want to say, but they know, one, they can't yell at their kids, they can't yell that, they can't yell it out loud. And so they have that safe space, especially with an official, maybe like yourself and maybe some more veteran officials where they know that they're not immediately going to get a technical for saying something that just needs to get off their chest. So, I don't know if you want to talk any more to that, but I just want to let our viewers know, like, this is a reality, not because we're trying to skirt a rule. We're trying to let a coach get away with an expletive, but there's meaningful situations that allow for that and to not penalize a coach, especially if they're being in a joking manner and not sarcastic.
Yeah, but you hit it on the head there with they're joking with us. They're not being sarcastic and they're not mad at us or anything like that. You can have some conversations that nobody else hears, and you both can chuckle and walk away and have, and it doesn't detract from the game. You're not missing a rule or anything like that. But it makes some of those interactions, I think, do kind of like what you're trying to do here with the podcast. Mm-hmm. It makes us human to them and makes them human to us. And you want to make sure that you have good rapport with the coaches while also drawing the fine line between professional relationships and you probably bad form to be best friends with the coach and then go ref their game, but yep. you can also have a little bit of an off the court relationship so that when you walk in the door they go, oh good, so and so's here tonight, not, oh man, we got that person again.
Yep.
So if you have a little bit of the rapport with them and make it so that they're excited to see you,
yep.
I think makes us all human.
Yep. For sure. And so I just, again, wanted to clarify that. And like you said, like that rapport with the official or with the coaches, knowing that you both are human, like that is the goal of this podcast, but it's also reality of what officials are trying to do out on the court. And there are coaches that are doing that as well. I mean, we get some bad apples every once in a while, but sometimes it's a game. They get intense. They get, I don't want to say emotional. They get, they just want their team to win. And so they get into that mindset, and we have to realize that's just, sometimes it's just a game, and it just happened that game as well. So, yeah.
People get caught up in the moment and knowing when the difference is of being caught in a moment and emotional and being I guess, intentionally mean or derogatory. And I think there's a real difference there. There's times that I've had coaches get after me or yell at me, and it's over 3 minutes later. And then there's other ones that I think that have carried that with them for a decade. And you're like, well, I guess that one's on you, because I don't carry that same grudge. I don't.
Yep.
You see a different team and a different coach and a different player every single night, and yeah, you remember a lot of plays, but there's a lot of that stuff that just kind of, when you see that much repetition, they all kind of, there's a lot of them that run together.
Yeah, for sure. And did you mention an interaction with another official, a fun one?
The no-lanyard challenge.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yep.
Yeah. There's been a couple of guys that we've tried that when you've got a game that maybe is a little bit more in hand, where you still have to be professional, but
yep,
you can have a little more fun with the game because it's a 40-50 point blowout or something like that, where you can get away with a few of those things, and maybe they're not a conference game. They're part of that prairie circuit out in the middle of nowhere that there's 4 people in the stands and none of them know you're doing any of that.
Yep. And another thing is, even with that, there is still a concentration factor that happens. And so even if you're concentrating on that, you're still concentrating on the game as well. It's not like, we're doing this and we're totally spacing out on the game. It's like everything is the same. It's just adding an element to it to make the game more enjoyable for yourselves. Because it's a tough thing to do, where the game's out of hand. You're giving it the best for the players as well, but you also want to stay engaged and do a good job as well. And so you're kind of balancing that fun with your the people you're working with, as well as with the game.
Yeah, you're finding ways to make sure you stay engaged and find ways to get better in something that maybe the play calling or the actual basketball isn't the greatest. You can find things to work on to get better in other ways too.
Yep, for sure. And that's, I've never thought of the lanyard challenge, so that might be an interesting one to consider. It definitely makes a difference when you're trying to report fouls. That gets a little tricky, but I'm sure there's tips and tricks that you could definitely share with us on that. But speaking of that, wearing a lanyard is in the mechanics manual, so it's not really the rules book. But along that same lines, there are rules.
Recommended.
Yeah, recommended. There you go.
And I think Buck Simmons made a point to Royce that it's no longer going to be recommended. It's going to be part of the uniform, because Royce went a year or two without using a lanyard.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I think Buck was not Wayne Carney. Sorry,
okay.
not Buck Simmons. Yeah. Wayne Carney was not real thrilled about it, and I think our assigners out here aren't real thrilled about that, because then you get younger officials who need to be working on a lot of other things, trying to do the no lanyard challenge. Yeah. That's a bad precedent, probably. But.
Yeah, for sure. I get what you're saying there.
Fun.
Yep. So not really a rule, but kind of a rule. But then transitioning,
more of a guideline.
Yeah. In transitioning into that, there are rules that we follow. There are rules that we like, that we dislike, that we wish we could just rip out of the book at times. But two-part question, what is a rule that you were glad was added during your time as an official here? And then what's one you maybe do not like? I don't think I've ever had someone say they do not like a rule, or wish was modified maybe.
The one I'm happy was added to the shot clock. Wyoming does not have a shot clock, and when you go back and forth, sometimes those games feel like they're being played in 1975 instead of 2023 or 4. That they'll run the flex offense for 4 minutes straight and sets basketball back a ways. But the one that I think I would like to see them do away with is just it's an NFHS goaltending or basket interference rule, where it can actually hit the backboard and not be, as long as it's not above the cylinder, not on the way down, if the ball's still on the way up, it can hit the backboard and you can block it and it's not a violation. And I think that's really, really tricky. It's to decipher that. I think it's much easier to just, hey, if it hits the backboard first, it's got to be goaltending, like college is, like NBA is, like FIBA is, like every other body is. We have this year, I don't know, first shot clock of the game, we had a pin block that was that same situation, and it was the Watertown head coach lost his mind, and we had to warn him 30 seconds into the game and have a conversation about what the rule was. And it was the boys' game, and actually Royce was standing down on the end, and he knows him pretty well too. And Royce confirmed it with him, and that's actually the rule. He goes, they got it right. And he's like, you've got to be kidding me. That can't be right. And we had conversations throughout the game, and I think he finally came around to believing that we were correct. And that may have been more just because they won by 15 or 20 and he didn't have much else to complain about.
For sure.
But it was a fun interaction. And I like seeing those guys when they come out this way too, the East River guys.
Yep.
That's why I like to go to Pier. You get to see 2 East River teams at a time rather than just a Stevens or Central game, or once in a while one of the other ones where you got Douglas and Sturgis and Spearfish.
Mm-hmm.
They don't play the Sioux Falls schools anymore, so getting to see the Metro schools is nice, especially if you can get to Pier to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Whenever nobody knows you, everybody hates you there.
No kidding. So we do have a few new rules this year. I don't know if you've seen the releases or whatnot, but there's 2 that I'm kind of curious about that I've been asking a few people. There is now a rule that's similar to the college rule, where if there's blood, now we have 20 seconds for a player or a coach to address that blood issue on a uniform without leaving the game. And so what's your thoughts on that rule, kind of similar to the college world?
I think it's a little quick, but I understand trying to move the game along and things like that. We had a blood issue last year. I remember in a game that there was blood on like 4 different players' jerseys, and it came from the opposing player. And so we actually we took care of the opposing player who had blood on his knuckle, and it just hit a bunch of players. So we let them probably have more time than they should have to change their jerseys, but they had a whole pile of them that they needed to go through, and it wasn't their fault. It was somebody else's. So we just told the other coach, hey, take care of your kid. It's his fault. That they're all bloody. So they're on the road on the second day of a trip. So that's not like they have extras to go get anywhere or anything. Yep. So, but yeah, I think maybe 20 seconds might be a little bit quick to repair that. Or now we've just moved it to sub them out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because compared to, so college, it's the same thing. It's 20 seconds. Mm-hmm. High school never really had one. It's blood. You got to go. But yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't really care either way. Let's decide, hey, we're going to try to resolve this. If you don't, you're going to get off the court. And so mm-hmm. I'm all for it. I know some people are against it. They're like, let's keep the game moving, get them out. The next dead ball, like literally you could just throw the ball off of someone's foot, get them right back in. So, I mean, it's kind of going to just depend on the, people that want to do that. Another new rule that some people may not know about is the faking being fouled. Now, we've got a warning for the first violation and then a technical for any subsequent faking. So kind of like the college realm again. What's your thought on that? Do you see a lot of faking being fouled and the need for this?
I do think it's a good implementation, because I think the flopping or faking being fouled has been a thing. And I think because in the past, your only recourse was a technical foul. And I think having a warning of some sort, a first violation that isn't so severe, I think is a good move, because I think it'll allow that to be called, where no coaches wanted it called as a first-time technical.
Yep.
Refs had a hard time putting air in that whistle and needing to be a part of that play. It was easier to call that a block and just that it was a block and move on. And I think having another option that isn't as severe as a technical, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, I see this kind of as a mirror of the coach's warning kind of being implemented as well. Not too many people wanted to go right to a technical. Not too many people wanted to just give the stop sign. They wanted something between there, or talking to the coach and saying, "Hey, we got to be done with this." So I like this fine line that we're drawing in the sand of saying, "Hey, you can do this. That's fine, But now you're going to get something for it. It's a warning, and now the rest of your team knows that everything else after that is going to be technical. So take care of your team.
Yep.
So I like the implementation. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I think it's good. I'm a fan of that one. Have you heard if we as a state are adopting the 5-second closely guarded on a dribble? Are we getting rid of that? I've heard it's going to be an option, but I haven't heard if we are as a state getting rid of that yet.
So this is hearsay. So anyone listening, this is hearsay. I've heard that we do not have the board that does the rules. They're not meeting for another 1 or 2 years. And so they are the board that would be able to decide if that option is available. So as of right now, I'm hearing...
It seems silly that we would not have that option available every single year.
Yep. And so that's unfortunate. And so I've been asking around and saying, is there a way to do a special session or whatever you call it to get them together to try to do that? But as of right now, my guess is it's a no. But again, that's always... I don't know everything. I'm not big into SDHSAA. I don't know the context like some other people I've reached out to, but that's, as of what I've heard, that is the thought behind it. But like I said, I've mentioned, is there some sort of special session they can put together to do that? But for those listening about this, in the college world, there's when the player is dribbling, there's no 5-second count during closely guarded, and so. In high school, they said, hey, optional based on state. If your state says you can do it, you do not need to count while the player's dribbling the ball. When they're holding the ball...
Only if you have a shot clock available.
Oh, okay. Yes. If you have a shot clock available, that's correct. If you're holding the ball, then the 5 count resumes or starts, however you want to say that. And so, yeah, there's this option now to not have the count. It's good for officials with the shot clock because now... As an official, if I have a player in my primary and they dribble out of my primary and way opposite of me, I'm still in control of that count. The other officials are not supposed to, so I'm watching things way across the court when I could be watching things in front of me. So that's the rationale behind that, and so we will just have to see what happens. But yes, it's, again, thanks for the clarification, it's only for the states with a shot clock. So I'm all for that one as well. I think that's great to not be looking 90 feet away from your primary. To get something that's not really as important, in my opinion. If that person's playing great defense, they can probably steal the ball or force a shot clock violation. So those are my takes on these things. But yeah, you're all for that as well.
Yep, I'm 100% for that. I think it makes the game easier to officiate. Gets rid of some, like you said, unnecessary ball watching that. You don't have to follow it all the way across out of your primary when you have other things you should or could be. And I know it's not always about what's easiest for refs because there would be a lot more changes if that were the case. But I think it makes sense just from when you have the shot clock, the 5-second count isn't nearly as important. When you used to be able to just stand out there and if you could dribble out whatever 3 minutes of the clock, I think that rule should stay. But if we're going to be 30-second shot clock, 35-second shot clock, whatever, then that's plenty.
Yep. I'm right on board with you. Maybe we can get something going, get a petition signed. I don't know. I'm just kidding, but maybe we can spearhead that. But we will see this.
We'll talk to Larry.
Yeah, we'll see this. Who knows when this podcast will be released? Maybe they've resolved that issue by that time. But yeah, we will see at that point. Lastly, just one thing I want to ask. I've been asking a lot of coaches this. I've been asking a lot of officials this. The question is for a newer official, whether they're really young, so whether they're like you, right in college, they're starting to officiate, or they're 35 and just starting. What is a piece of advice you would give to that person? They're not really sure if they want to stick it out. They're not really sure they're enjoying it, or just like they want to get better. What's a little tidbit of advice you would give to that person that's newer to the game?
I would find a mentor, somebody that is willing to drag you along to some games and work some games with you that you can call and run plays off of as you're learning. And then I would also, if you've got an assigner in your area, when they send out games that, hey, we've got somebody turned a game back. Is anybody available for a Thursday game or wherever? Regardless of if there's a way that you can make it work, I would say available, even if you're 2 hours later and it's probably already filled. As you're first starting, trying to pick those games up, be readily available for your assigner, because there will come a day where the games don't always go out to an email. They call you because they know you're reliable. You've made the impression that, hey, you'll get there, you'll do the games. And you also have to be good on the floor for that to work too, and hold up your end of the bargain. But it's all about building relationships. Stay on your assigner's good side, I would say. And go make the connections with as many of the other refs as you can. Don't be a hermit. Forge those relationships on purpose, because they will become, if you stay in the application, they'll become some of your best friends that you talk to all year round, even when you're not going to games, or the people that you call to go golf with, or just you have something happen that after you tell your spouse and family, usually they're the next person you call and say, hey, this is cool, this happened to me. And they're the people that you talk to the most often, for sure.
Yeah, and just for the people on the east side of the state, that's even more of a thing. Like, we get some assigners for the bigger schools. You guys have more of an assigner system out there in West River. East River is kind of like you said, the don't be a hermit sort of thing. Like, you got to get out, you got to meet people, and really kind of put your face out there, because the east side, I got a contract. Joe, you want to come with me? And so
be somebody you want to have, be the person that somebody wants to drag you along as you're learning.
For sure. I will leave it with that. That's a better statement than what I would ever say. So be the person that someone else wants to drag along. That's we'll put that quote in the picture there. So anyway, thanks again, Joe. Any other things you want to say before we close out the podcast here this evening?
No, it's just been fun. I enjoyed it. I'm happy somebody's doing this. I've kicked around the idea of doing a podcast, but haven't come up with a good idea that I want to talk about every single time. So kudos to you, and happy to have done it. And if you ever have questions or anything, or if you're out in this part of the world, hit me up.
For sure. Sounds good. Thank you, Joe. Everybody, this has been Joe Beehler. I am Andrew Gross, and this is the Irenic Ref podcast, and we hope to see you next time.